Behind closed doors, Marcus worked late nights drafting a bold plan to address these systemic issues. He called an emergency meeting with the leadership team, where he laid everything out: the complaints, the toxic culture, and the receptionist's actions that sparked it all. Some executives looked defensive, others ashamed. But one person, a senior manager, outright challenged him, claiming that Marcus was overreacting and making a big deal out of nothing. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus calmly but firmly stood his ground, his voice steady as he reminded them of their responsibility to create a workplace that valued every employee. But even as he spoke, Marcus could sense resistance. Change wasn't going to come easily, and this was only the beginning. What happened next would decide the future of the company, and everyone was watching. As Marcus pressed forward with his plans for change, something unexpected happened. One of the junior employees, an intern of all people, approached him quietly after the leadership meeting. She looked nervous but determined as she handed him a folder. Inside were emails, memos, and notes documenting instances of bias and mistreatment that had been systematically ignored. What stood out the most was a chain of messages involving senior staff, including the manager who had challenged Marcus earlier. The tone of the emails was dismissive, even mocking, toward employees who had raised concerns. Marcus was stunned. This wasn't just passive oversight. There were deliberate efforts to suppress complaints and maintain the status quo. It wasn't just a cultural issue, it was a structural one. Worse, the receptionist who had called the police on him had a history of similar behavior that had been swept under the rug by some of the same people now resisting change. The discovery raised the stakes in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. He realized that fixing the company wouldn't just mean reshaping its culture. It meant confronting people who had actively worked to protect a broken system. And as word began to spread about Marcus's growing investigation, tensions in the office reached a boiling point. Lines were being drawn, alliances formed. Some employees were rallying behind Marcus's vision, while others were trying to undermine his efforts from the shadows. It was clear. The company was on the brink of a major upheaval, and Marcus was at the center of it all. The day of the big company meeting arrived. Marcus had called everyone together: employees, managers, and even board members. The air was thick with tension as people filed into the room, unsure of what was about to happen. Marcus stood at the front, calm but resolute, and began by addressing the incident that started it all. He recounted the receptionist's actions, not as a personal grievance, but as a symptom of a larger problem. Then he laid everything bare: the culture of bias, the ignored complaints, and the deliberate suppression of issues by senior staff. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, Marcus dropped the final bombshell. He displayed the emails the intern had given him, exposing the senior manager who had resisted him most. Gasps filled the room as the manager tried to deny the allegations, but the evidence was undeniable. Marcus announced that effective immediately, sweeping changes would be made: new policies, mandatory training, and an independent review board to handle employee concerns. But just as the tension began to ease, Marcus delivered one last twist. He revealed that he wasn't just transforming the company from within. He was stepping down as CEO to let someone else lead the change. He introduced the new CEO, a former employee who had left years ago due to the toxic culture, but had since become a respected advocate for workplace equity. The room erupted in shock and applause as Marcus stepped aside, his legacy cemented not just as a leader, but as someone who wasn't afraid to put the company's future above his own position. As the meeting ended, a new energy filled the office. Employees who had felt unheard for years were now at the forefront of the company's transformation. The new CEO, a familiar face with a deep understanding of the challenges, wasted no time in connecting with the team and outlining actionable steps for change. Marcus, now watching from the sidelines, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The receptionist who sparked the upheaval had resigned shortly after the incident, but her actions served as a wake-up call that no one would forget. The toxic systems that had been hidden in plain sight were finally being dismantled. Marcus reflected on the journey, realizing that real leadership isn't just about building something successful, it's about creating a legacy of fairness, accountability, and growth. The company was no longer just a workplace. It was becoming a community where everyone could truly belong. Imagine walking into a company you built from the ground up, only to have the receptionist glare at you and accuse you of trespassing. That's exactly what happened to Marcus, a successful Black CEO who was excited to visit his new office. Instead of a warm welcome, he was met with suspicion and hostility. The receptionist didn't even ask questions. She called the police, assuming he didn't belong there. But Marcus wasn't just going to let this slide. What happened next didn't just challenge the company's culture, it sparked a transformation that no one saw coming. This story is about more than one person's experience with prejudice. It's a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and making real change. Stay with me, because Marcus's response will leave you inspired and thinking differently about what it means to turn injustice into opportunity. Marcus had always believed in leading by example. As a self-made entrepreneur, he knew the value of hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect. But standing there, watching the receptionist whisper into the phone, he felt a mix of disbelief and disappointment. How could this be happening in his own company? The officers arrived quickly, and Marcus calmly explained who he was. They looked skeptical until he presented his ID and proof of ownership. The receptionist's face turned pale, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she muttered something under her breath and hurried away. Marcus wasn't just upset, he was determined. This incident wasn't just about him, it was a reflection of something deeper. If this was how an employee treated the CEO, how other visitors, clients, or even co-workers being treated, Marcus decided then and there that he wouldn't let this moment pass without making a lasting impact. After the incident, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just one bad interaction. He started looking into the company's culture and practices, and what he found shocked him. Complaints about discrimination and bias had been ignored or buried in HR reports. Employees of color shared stories of being overlooked for promotions or being treated unfairly by their peers. The receptionist's actions were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus began reaching out to his team, holding private meetings to hear their experiences directly. Some spoke hesitantly, afraid of retaliation, while others admitted they'd already started looking for new jobs because they felt undervalued. It wasn't just about race. There were issues with favoritism, toxic management, and a lack of accountability across the board. Meanwhile, whispers about the confrontation at the front desk had spread through the office. People were nervous, unsure of what Marcus would do next. But as he listened and observed, Marcus quietly started forming a plan, one that would challenge everything the company thought it stood for. After the incident, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just one bad interaction. He started looking into the company's culture and practices, and what he found shocked him. Complaints about discrimination and bias had been ignored or buried in HR reports. Employees of color shared stories of being overlooked for promotions or being treated unfairly by their peers. The receptionist's actions were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus began reaching out to his team, holding private meetings to hear their experiences directly. Some spoke hesitantly, afraid of retaliation, while others admitted they'd already started looking for new jobs because they felt undervalued. It wasn't just about race. There were issues with favoritism, toxic management, and a lack of accountability across the board. Meanwhile, whispers about the confrontation at the front desk had spread through the office. People were nervous, unsure of what Marcus would do next. But as he listened and observed, Marcus quietly started forming a plan, one that would challenge everything the company thought it stood for. As days turned into weeks, Marcus's investigation uncovered more than he had imagined. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents, there was a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. He noticed a divide within the company. Some employees thrived, while others felt invisible. Policies meant to protect workers from discrimination were rarely enforced, and the few who spoke up were often dismissed or labeled as troublemakers. The realization weighed heavily on Marcus, but it also fueled his determination to act.